Man is a house with many servants, but no master. The ordinary person is like a house in which all the servants quarrel for supremacy, while the master is absent. Within the rich tradition of Sufi psychology lies a powerful metaphor for the human condition, that of a grand house filled with servants, each performing their functions, yet without the conscious presence of the master. This image appears across Sufi teachings and was later popularized in the West by George Gurdjieff, whose work drew heavily from Sufi sources. As the 13th century Sufi master Najm al-Din Kubra observed, the human being contains multitudes that move without coordination. Only when the ruler takes his rightful place can harmony emerge from chaos. This concept provides not merely a psychological curiosity, but a profound diagnosis of the human condition and the starting point for the inner work that Sufis consider essential to spiritual development. Man's being has many rooms and many servants. Each servant believes itself to be the master until the true master appears. Abdullah Ansari of Herat, Intimate Conversations. In this metaphor, the house represents the complete human being, while the servants represent the various functions, faculties, and impulses that operate within us. The 12th century Sufi master Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali categorized these servants in his masterwork, The Revival of Religious Sciences. The human being contains faculties of appetite, anger, imagination, memory, reason, and many others. Each has its proper function, yet each seeks to dominate the others. The faculty of anger believes it should rule when provoked. The faculty of appetite believes it should rule when desire arises, and the rational faculty believes it should always govern. Yet none is qualified for complete authority. Ibn Arabi, the great 13th century Andalusian Sufi, elaborated, "The self contains a parliament of competing voices. The eye demands to look at what attracts it. The ear strains toward fascinating sounds. The tongue wishes to speak. The mind craves stimulation. The heart yearns for connection. Each clamors for attention without regard for the others or for the whole." The 11th century Persian Sufi master Al-Kushairi noted in his Risala, treatise, "The servants in the house include not only the obvious faculties, but also hidden impulses, the desire for recognition, the fear of insignificance, the hope for security, the dread of mortality. These too act as autonomous forces when no master is present." The tragedy is not that the house has many servants, but that the master sleeps. Jalaluddin Rumi, Mathnawi. Who then is this absent master? In Sufi psychology, the master represents conscious presence or awareness, what some traditions call witnessing consciousness. The 14th century Sufi poet Mahmud Shabistari wrote in his Secret Rose Garden, "You have forgotten who you are and imagine yourself to be the servants. The master of the house lies concealed within you, while you wander homeless from room to room." Ibn Arabi explains the nature of this absence. The master is not absent through non-existence, but through inattention. Like the sun concealed by clouds, presence exists but is veiled by the activity of the very servants it should command. This understanding distinguishes the Sufi approach from those that seek to suppress or eliminate aspects of the self. As the 10th century Sufi Abu Sa'id ibn Abil Khair observed, The aim is not to dismiss the servants, for each has value. The aim is for the master to awaken and establish rightful authority in the house. The Persian Sufi Bayezid Bastami described his own experience. For years I thought I was traveling toward God, only to realize at last that he whom I sought was the traveler. The master was never truly absent, but had so identified with various servants as to forget his own nature. When the master is absent, the house falls into disorder. Not that the servants cease working, quite the opposite. Each continues its function, but without coordination or higher purpose. Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, Secret of Secrets. The consequences of this internal anarchy are far-reaching. The 13th century Sufi Najm al-Din Razi described the condition. Without the master's presence, the house becomes like a kingdom where each provincial governor declares himself king. The cook abandons the kitchen to command armies. The gardener leaves the garden to adjudicate disputes. The astronomer descends from his tower to manage the treasury. All functions suffer when faculties exceed their proper domain. This creates what later Sufi teacher Idris Shah would call functional disharmony, not a lack of function, but a chaos of functions without integration. As the 11th century Sufi master Al-Hujwiri wrote in his Revelation of the Veiled, "The self without presence is like an orchestra without a conductor. Each instrument may play beautifully, but the result is cacophony rather than symphony." The 12th century Sufi poet Attar described the practical consequences. The hand reaches for what the eye desires, heedless of what the heart knows to be harmful. The tongue speaks what earns immediate approval, regardless of long-term consequences. The mind chases fascinating thoughts with no regard for their truth. Such is life when servants rule the house. The one who sleeps is like a mechanical device, responding automatically to whatever winds the spring, attributed to Sufi teachings as preserved by Gurdjieff. A key insight of this Sufi concept is that without the master's presence, human behavior becomes mechanical, automatic responses triggered by external and internal stimuli rather than conscious choices. The 14th century Sufi Abd al-Karim al-Jili noted, "The sleeping person believes he acts from freedom, yet his actions are determined by whatever servant happens to dominate at a given moment. 1 hour anger rules, the next hour desire, then fear, then rationalization, each believing itself to be I during its temporary reign." This mechanical nature extends even to supposedly spiritual activities. The 9th century female Sufi Rabia al-Adawiya observed, "Many worship God from habit rather than presence. Their prayers are performed by the servant of routine while the master remains asleep. Such worship reaches the outer form, but misses the essence." Ibn Arabi described the irony of the situation. The mechanical person prides himself on his consistency, not realizing this represents not discipline, but unconscious repetition. True consistency comes not from habit, but from the unwavering light of presence. Al-Ghazali offered this pointed observation. Even knowledge of this condition becomes merely another mechanical function if the master remains absent. One can speak eloquently about presence while remaining entirely unconscious. First, one must realize that the master is missing. This itself is no small achievement. Junaid of Baghdad, as recorded in Sufi manuscripts. The recognition of one's mechanical nature, that one is a house with quarreling servants but no effective master, marks the beginning of the Sufi path. The 13th century Anatolian Sufi Yunus Emre wrote, "For 40 years I traveled thinking I was going somewhere, only to discover I was a house whose master was asleep in the basement, dreaming of journeys." How then does one awaken the master? Sufi traditions offer specific practices beginning with self-observation. As the 10th century Sufi Al-Nifari recorded, "The Lord said to me, 'Watch yourself as one who watches a stranger, and you will begin to see the sleeper stir.'" The practice of zikr, remembrance, serves to call the master home. The 14th century Sufi Ibn Ata-Allah al-Iskandari explained, "Remembrance is like calling the name of the master throughout the rooms of the house. At first there is no response, but with persistence the sleeping one begins to hear his name." The 12th century Sufi Abu Madyan described another approach. "Place a guard at the door of the house. Let nothing enter or leave without being seen. This guard is attention, and its vigilance gradually awakens the master." Physical practices also played a role. The 13th century founder of the Mevlevi order, Rumi, explained the function of the renowned whirling practice. The turning of the body disrupts the mechanical patterns of the servants, creating a space in which the master may awaken. The dancers may begin as empty houses, but through movement, the sleeper stirs. When the master awakens, he does not dismiss the servants, but assigns each its proper place and function. Ibn Arabi, Meccan Revelations. Sufi traditions describe not only the problem of the absent master, but also the transformed state when presence is established. The Persian Sufi Aziz Nasafi wrote, "When the master takes his seat in the center of the house, each servant continues its work, but now in harmony with all others. The eye still sees, but now in service to the whole. The mind still thinks, but now in alignment with deeper wisdom." This harmony creates what the 13th century Sufi Najm al-Din Razi called the perfected human, al-Insan al-Kamil. In the perfected human, the light of presence illuminates every room of the house. Actions flow not from mechanical reaction, but from integrated wisdom. Such a person may outwardly resemble others, but inwardly has undergone a fundamental transformation. Bayazid Bastami described his experience after awakening. "Now when I speak, it is not the servant of speech operating automatically, but words flowing from presence. When I act, it is not the servant of habit, but movement arising from awareness. The difference may be invisible to observers, but constitutes an entirely different order of being." This awakened state brings remarkable capacities. As Ibn Arabi observed, when the master is present, the house gains access to knowledge beyond the reach of the servants alone. The eye sees meanings, not just forms. The ear hears the unspoken. The heart perceives directly what the mind could only approach through laborious steps. The master's awakening is rarely complete or permanent at first. He stirs, takes authority briefly, then sleep returns. Al-Ghazali, The Alchemy of Happiness. Sufi psychology recognizes that the awakening of presence typically occurs in stages rather than as a single permanent event. The 10th century Central Asian Sufi al-Sulami described this process. First comes momentary awakening, seconds or minutes when the master stirs, looks around in wonder, then sleeps again. Gradually, these moments extend in duration and frequency until the house knows its true ruler. Even advanced practitioners experience fluctuations. As Rumi noted, "Do not imagine that the master, once awakened, remains perpetually alert without effort. The servants have ruled the house for so long that they constantly attempt to usurp authority again. Vigilance remains necessary even for the realized one." The 15th century Sufi Abdullah Jami offered this perspective. The difference between the beginner and the advanced practitioner is not that one sleeps while the other is permanently awake. Rather, the beginner sleeps unconsciously, while the advanced one sleeps consciously, maintaining a thread of presence even in slumber. The unminded house exists not only within individual humans, but also within communities, organizations, and societies, adapted from Idris Shah, Learning How to Learn. Sufi teachers have applied this metaphor beyond individual psychology to understand collective phenomena. The 14th century North African Sufi Ibn Khaldun observed, "A society without conscious leadership is like a grand palace where the servants have forgotten their master. The treasury officials, military commanders, legal authorities, and religious functionaries all perform their duties, but without coordination toward higher purpose." More recent Sufi teachers have noted the relevance of this understanding to modern institutions. As Idris Shah wrote, "Corporations, governments, educational systems, and even religious organizations often function as houses full of activity, but lacking the integration that only presence can provide." The metaphor offers insight into not only the diagnosis, but also the potential transformation of collective systems. As a contemporary adaptation of Sufi teaching suggests, just as the individual awakening begins with self-observation, institutional awakening begins with honest assessment. And just as the individual servants are not enemies to be defeated, but faculties to be harmonized, so too the various functions within organizations need not be opposed, but rather integrated through higher awareness. The 13th century Persian poet Saadi Shirazi offers a fitting conclusion. When each person becomes a minded house, with the master awake and the servants in harmony, then society itself transforms. For what is a community but a larger dwelling composed of many houses? And what is civilization but the architecture that joins these houses together?